Got a favourite EU nation? Well, good news. We sell our countries with shoes badges featuring our iconic designs for every single EU country. And if you use code SWEDEN and buy 2 pins, you'll get a random third one for free. The offer ends Thursday the 16th of December. The Sweden Democrats. If you didn't know otherwise, you'd think they were your bog standard run-of-the-mill centre-ish party. They've got a relatively innocent sounding name and even a nice flower for the logo. In reality, the SD are the most extreme right party to break into mainstream Swedish politics in modern history. In the space of a few years, they've gone from fringe outlier to one of the big players in Swedish politics, recently joining forces with Sweden's 2 largest centre-right parties to propose a new budget. Such an astronomical rise and normalisation invariably leads us to question, how did the Swedish Democrats go from a toxic, untouchable party to a centre-right coalition contender? Well, in this video, let's attempt to answer those very questions. Founded back in 1988 as a direct successor to the Sweden Party, for the most of their history the Swedish Democrats have been politically irrelevant. Due to ties to neo-Nazis and fascism more generally, a cordon sanitaire developed around the party. This is essentially when a party is so toxic or extreme that all of the parties simply refuse to work with them, i.e. the mainstream political parties erect a barrier around the extreme party which is called a cordon sanitaire. Notable European countries include the AfD in Germany and National Rally, formerly National Front in France, who are both usually excluded by the mainstream traditional parties. In France, the cordon sanitaire even has its own name to refer specifically to the cordon around the Front National, Front Républicain. It's worth noting that this isn't a Europe-wide phenomenon. In Denmark, Norway and Austria, for example, centre-right parties are happy to cooperate with their more extreme counterparts. Anyway, back to Sweden. The cordon sanitaire around the Sweden Democrats remained pretty strong for some time, in part on moral grounds, and in part it didn't really make political sense to cooperate. The Sweden Democrats stood on a staunchly anti-immigration platform, and this just wasn't politically viable in a country famed for what Brookings termed a proud national narrative of Swedish exceptionalism, for welcoming refugees and providing asylum. The point is that for most of the 21st century, being anti-immigration in Sweden just didn't win you votes. It wasn't a salient issue, which is why, before 2014, the Swedish Democrats never won more than 6% of the vote in national elections. However, as Swedish public opinion towards refugees began to sour, the Swedish Democrat stock gradually rose, and even mainstream politicians had to recalibrate. In November 2014, for example, the then Prime Minister announced a drastic end to Sweden's open door policy for asylum seekers, insisting that Sweden simply cannot do any more, a sharp U-turn from just a few months earlier when he had passionately decried "My Europe takes in refugees, my Europe doesn't build walls." By June 2015, the government had introduced legislation tightening the rules of asylum and making it harder to obtain permanent residency. It wasn't just immigration where the Swedish Democrats were ahead of the electoral curve. With the significant increase in violent crime and especially gun crime, their other main policy focus, law and order, suddenly looked remarkably prescient. Speaking to the Financial Times, Mattias Karlsson, the then parliamentary leader for the Swedish Democrats, stressed that there is a big frustration and anger at developments. Our laws are too soft. The police don't have the means to investigate this very serious crime. At the same time, the Swedish Democrats began to moderate their policies to widen their electoral appeal. This brand detoxification probably started under Jimmy Åkesson, elected leader in 2005, who replaced their old logo of a burning torch with the flower we see today. For instance, in 1994, the party wanted to stop all immigration from ethnically distant cultures. In 1996, this was revised to stop all immigration of people whose origin is from outside the Western cultural sphere. In its 2011 manifesto, however, the party states that it's not opposed to immigration, but are of the view that immigration must be kept at a level and be of such character that it does not pose a threat to our national identity or to the welfare and safety of our country. As Anders Weildfeld writes in his book Extreme Right Parties in Scandinavia, a similar de-radicalisation is also apparent in their attitude to repatriation. It was party policy back in 1989 to support the repatriation of all immigrants of non-European origin, but by 2011 they'd been revised down to merely providing active and generous support to those wishing to return to their home countries. More recently, in 2019, they ditched their Swexit policy in favour of a more moderate Euroscepticism, and they were one of only a few parties to actually criticise the Swedish approach to COVID. As we've covered time and time again on the channel, Sweden was a relative outsider, refusing to go into full lockdown until very, very late on in the pandemic. The party's also tempered some of its anti-Islam and anti-Muslim sentiments. The most recent manifesto insists that they have no issue with Islam specifically, but that their issue is with Islamism or any other extremist ideology. And when Martin Strid, a Swedish Democrat politician, said in 2017 that Muslims weren't completely human, he was immediately kicked out. Anyway, the point is that the Swedish electorate have shifted right, thanks to rising anxiety about immigration and violent crime, and the Swedish Democrats have become more palatable. This has gifted the Swedish Democrats significant electoral success and made things very difficult for the Swedish political establishment. Historically, Sweden has been ruled by either a centre-right coalition called the Alliance or a centre-left coalition, sometimes known as the Red-Green coalition. Beginning in 2010, as the Swedish Democrats have started winning seats, they've denied either coalition an outright majority, which has made governing very difficult. This has left Swedish politics with basically three options: minority government, very broad tent majority government spanning both coalitions, or a majority coalition including the Swedish Democrats, breaking the cordon sanitaire. Since 2010, the Swedish political establishment have oscillated between the first two options, but this has become increasingly difficult since 2018, when the Swedish Democrats have won 62 out of 349 seats, with 17.5% of the popular vote. Swedish MPs have struggled to form effective minority government or create a functioning broad tent coalition, and this is the fundamental reason behind the ongoing Swedish government crisis. As the centre-right parties have become increasingly frustrated, option 3 has started to look increasingly appealing. The cordon sanitaire was first weakened in December 2019 when Ulf Kristersson, the leader of the centre-right moderate party, said that on issues of immigration, law and order and energy, of course I want to be able to cooperate, insisting that Sweden cannot continue as it is now. In June 2020, the Left Party, who were very angry at the government for trying to abolish rent controls, decided to vote with the Swedish Democrats in triggering a no-confidence motion against the government. Finally, in November of this year, the cordon sanitaire was broken completely when the Swedish Democrats, moderates and Christian Democrats proposed a joint budget. If the three parties go on to win a majority in the 2022 elections, which is a very real possibility given they're collectively polling on 47%, they're widely expected to form a coalition government. Akeson said in June that he would want his party's influence over any future right-wing government to reflect the size of its vote, and given that they're polling on an impressive 20%, this would presumably involve a significant hardening of some policies, particularly on immigration. So, you get the point. The Swedish Democrats have forced their way into mainstream politics, breaking the cordon sanitaire. This is, in some sense, unsurprising. The traditional centre-right centre party has supported both Lövdén and Andersson, and the Liberal Party are currently polling below the 5% threshold, which means, realistically, if the moderates or the Christian Democrats ever want to implement any of their policies, electoral maths requires that they join forces with the Swedish Democrats. But what do you think? Is this the first step on a slippery slope towards right-wing fascism, or is this cordon sanitaire, for a party polling at 20%, both undemocratic and unreasonable? As I said at the start of the video, for a few more days, if you order any 2 countries with shoes pin badges, you'll get a 3rd random pin absolutely free. It's as easy as that. Buy 2 and get a 3rd random pin free. Don't like the random pin we send you? Then you can give it to someone as a Christmas gift. Stick it to someone's backpack without telling them, attach it to the sole of your shoe to give yourself an extra tap. It's up to you. The store's linked below, and the code is Sweden.